Hello, everyone. Can you all hear me in the room? Thank you, whoever's doing that thumbs up. So it's the official start time, but I think we still have some people who aren't here yet. In particular, I don't see Rowan in the attendees list. So we have some slack time in the agenda today, so I think we can wait a little bit just to let people trickle in. In the meantime, I would like to remind everyone who is there to make sure to scan the blue sheet, I think is the appropriate phrase, just so we make sure that everybody who's in attendance shows up in the record.
Tim, do you want to kick off?
Yep. Okay. Let's get started. Okay. Hello, everyone. This is Mimi at IETF 122. Yeah. Let's get into it. Okay. So as usual, everyone should make themselves aware of the relevant IETF policies on things like intellectual property, as well as the code of conduct. And as I said earlier, please make sure that you sort of register yourself properly as having attended this session. I think there might be like QR codes in the room to scan with your phone to turn on the blue sheet, but I might be wrong about that. All right. Can we get a volunteer to please take notes today? And if you're in the room and volunteering, do us a favor and identify yourself clearly into a microphone so that the chairs know who is helping us out.
Hey, this is Moshtaba. I will do it.
Thank you very much. It's very much appreciated. All right, next up, let's look at today's agenda. So we have the chair stuff, which we're doing right now. Then first up, we're going to wrap up an adoption call on the Discovery Requirements document, which has been pending for a while. Then we have some updates on Mimi architecture and or protocol. I think Richard Barnes is going to be speaking to architecture. Then Robert has some updates on minimization of metadata in Mimi. So I think that's like Mimi now. Rowan has some updates after that on content format, and then room policy, and finally identity. And finally, Brendan McMillian has some stuff to talk to us about subgroups in MLS, and which might be useful to Mimi. Okay, anybody want to bash this agenda? Anything we should add? I see a hand up. Was that a thumbs up?
Thumbs up looks good to me. Let's go.
Got it. Thank you, Richard. Okay. So, right, draft interop Mimi discovery requirements. So besides Mimi protocol, one of the major working group items is discovery. We've had a proposed draft, at least spelling out requirements for discovery. It's up for a second adoption call, which has been pending since February. There was a previous failed adoption call for a prior draft of the document back in September of last year. The authors went and worked with a few different working group members who noted some issues with the document, and they released a new version. So we've heard actually nothing since we sent out the call for adoption on the mailing list back in February, but neither support nor adoption. So now that we've got everybody in a room as sort of a captive audience, it seems like an opportune time to settle this and adopt this document or not. So I think the thing to do, Alyssa, I'm looking at you to see if you agree with me, is to throw up a show of hands here for an adoption call on this.
I mean, I'd
Or
much
we could
rather
just
just
see-
hear from anybody who objects. Like, it's been sitting out there a while. We know there was some like off list back and forth with people who commented on it before. I'm trying to get one of them to come into the chat here to express their support to adopt. But yeah, I think it would be good to just like hear from people one way or the other, especially if you object to the adoption of this document, which has now been around in the working group for quite some time.
That works for me. So, all right, then. In that case, the queue is open if anybody wants to speak for or against the adoption of draft 02 of the discovery requirements.
This is Richard Barnes. I think this. I have some minor comments about the document itself, but it seems like a fine starting point. So let's adopt it.
Thanks. Okay. Okay. We got another note in the chat from Ecker, who also supports the adoption of the doc. Anybody else? Okay. I think we can conclude the call for adoption in the affirmative. Consider the document adopted, and we will work with the authors to transition it into the working group repository.
Great. Thanks, everybody. All right. So that's it for sort of chair issues and admin stuff. So I think next up is Richard.
Chairs, you know if I can drive the slides myself? Let's see.
Possibly. Give it a shot.
Clicker doesn't seem to be doing anything.
Hang on. Let me see if I pass control to the slides clicker bot. Can you try it now?
You have to give control. There.
Voila.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Sweet.
So this is, as the slide says, no changes to this doc. Sometimes you write an architecture doc and you start writing down the protocol and you have to kind of redesign the architecture. We have somehow miraculously not had to do that. We accurately predicted what we were going to have, the architecture that was going to work for us, and it as we wrote the protocol, we've been following it. So this is just a recap to bring everyone up to speed in case you haven't been following the last couple meetings. So I'll go quick. This is what a Mimi chat room looks like. Early on in the working group, we decided, we've heard of client to server architectures, maybe client to server to client architectures. In Mimi, we have a client to server to server to server to client architecture. Each client is homed on its own local server representing its provider. There's a hub in the middle that represents the room, and other participants in the room might be on other servers. So interaction, if someone on server B starts an action and it propagates out to everyone in the room, that'll transit server A, server C, and server B, and ultimately out to the clients behind server B. If you haven't checked the Mimi charter, Mimi is scoped to inter-provider interoperability, so not the client-server interactions. We're focused on those inter-provider interactions. So that's kind of why we have this complex thing where we kind of use the servers to hide the client specifics. So yeah, the unit of functionality in Mimi is a room, which is exactly what you think it is. It's a point where you have a bunch of clients coming together to interact. A room is hosted on a hub, that server I was talking about that kind of owns and represents the room at a given time. And the room has state, which has these kind of layers of state to it. So there's a top level authorization policy that governs what can happen in the room. There's participation information, a list of user level participants in the room. And further down, there's at the MLS, the end-to-end security level, there's a list of clients, specific software instances, specific devices that are members of the MLS group, members of the MLS state. So each participant at the user level may have multiple devices or clients at the security level. One distinction that was a little bit more relevant early in the group as we were sorting out these definitions was this definition of active versus inactive. So it is possible for someone to be a user of the, to be a participant in the room and entitled to get the messages while not having any devices actually connected to the room. It's usually a transient state, but it's what kind of one we have to accommodate. Speaking of transitions and managing the state of the room, this is kind of illustrating those layers. So you have the policy that expresses what can happen in the room, the participant list that expresses the user level contents of the room, and the MLS group, which is the cryptographic state of the room that expresses the devices that are in the room. And here, as I was saying, user 3 doesn't have any devices, so they're inactive. As the room evolves, right, people join and leave, messages are sent, policy changes, people get banned, things like that. So we need to kind of keep all three of these layers of state coherent. So we have this principle that things on the left override things that are on the right. So the authorization policy governs what users can be in the room, and the set of users who are in the room govern what clients can be in the room. So a client can only be in the security state. You can only get access to the cryptographic keys if you belong to a user who is on the participant list. And you can only be a user on the participant list if you're allowed to be on the participant list by the policy. Now, at the same time, we use MLS and its group agreement properties to confirm that everyone has the same view of this. So we have this kind of feedback where the authorization policy and the participant list get reflected in the MLS group to confirm that everyone agrees on them. And so the MLS group kind of validates that everyone agrees on these authorization policies and participant lists. And again, that agreement property is kind of cryptographic in that if me and Rowan have different views of this, then our cryptographic state will diverge. We'll have different keys, and the whole thing decoheres. So it immediately becomes very obvious if we disagree. And so yeah, this kind of imposes some order of operations, which has been realized now in the protocol that you have to kind of propose changes and get them committed into the MLS group as they in order for them to take effect. And so there's some management of that order of operations in the protocol. You'll see this reflected there if you read the document. I think that's all I had. So that's your warm up. No new changes here from last time. And from here on out, we'll be talking to changes to the protocol document we've been doing recently. And for that, I will pass off to my colleague, Rowan. What was that, Jonathan? There is. Would you like to be a second?
No, I didn't see anything on the.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think he might be focused on decisions and things like that. So.
Hello, hello. Whoopsie. That looks dangerous. Hi. This is the age of Mimi. Let's massage Mimi into shape. This is a photo from a block and a half away here.
I saw that.
Yeah. Okay.
Hey, Rowan,
Yeah.
just interject. So on the agenda, we have you doing protocol, then Raphael talking about metadata, and then you're back doing content, room identity, and policy. Are you cool with going back and forth, or
Yes.
perhaps we could? You all right? Okay,
Yeah,
just check.
there's even a slide in the middle that's like the place to point to
The
switch.
handoff. Very
and then
thoughtful.
just as a minor like late agenda bash thing, I think I'm going to go longer on protocol and way shorter on content. So if you could pop up a, I don't know, 20-minute timer for me, that'd be really awesome.
No problem. I gave you the clicker. Yeah, that should be working. Good.
Cool. Okay. So it's too bad that doesn't work. So what has changed since Dublin? So there were a lot of small changes to franking. There were changes to the internal search mechanism to make it actually do to make the mechanism capable of doing what the text said you should be able to do. There was the addition of the first part of minimal metadata rooms, which is the pseudonyms part, which Raphael is going to be talking about shortly. And then there was the move, the addition into Mimi protocol of a concrete application component for participant lists. So basically, it's just a list of a user identifier and the role associated with that user. And then a mechanism to allow you to patch or diff that efficiently. There's also a room metadata app component. And so that's like the name of the room, the mood, the subject, the avatar of the room, that kind of stuff. So those were added, those were moved in from draft May Mimi app components. A bunch of minor struct improvements. There were things, that were missing, or like we realized that, oh yeah, like, in one case there was a signature and there was a sign with label comment, and the sign with label comment didn't actually include the name of the key that you were supposed to use to sign in, right? Things like that. And then finally, there was some, updating to the latest version of the of Martin Thompson's template, some CI stuff, and like stuff like that. We discussed the things here related to the participant list and the room metadata extensively in the interims. And the other items were seemed pretty uncontroversial. Franking, I did a presentation of the franking mechanism in the CFRG research group, and asked for review over there. I got 2 people who like explicitly reached out and said that they would go and give it a review. But yeah, if you have some friends in the crypto community that you would like to hit up for a review, this is an area that is subtle and moderately complex. So it's got some interesting properties. So it's good to have somebody have a look at it. All right. At the moment, there are 3 PRs open. There is a replacement for the previously ancient PR proxy download endpoint. This new PR already has some nice, vigorous discussion on it. I'll have a slide on that shortly. There is another little small thing to improve the integrity of the key package requests. And then I realized this morning, as I was looking through the other PRs, that a PR that I did previously on the group info response allowed for a 2-time pad situation. And so I added a nonce to the group info response to prevent that in that PR. Okay, so what's in this download proxy PR? Because this is one of the last major areas that we said we were going to do in Mimi protocol, which we didn't have an endpoint for. So the idea is that an attachment Thank you, Raphael. In a room is, that's when somebody is about to send an image, a video, like a kind of a traditional attachment with like a PDF file or something, a Word document, whatever. And usually, traditionally that's not sent in the body of the instant message. That's sent, it's uploaded somewhere, usually on the sender's local provider. And then that link is put in Mimi content. It's put in an external part, and then sent, and then it's encrypted. It's got a content hash, a hash of the plain text that's sent to the other. That's sent to all the participants, and then they can take that and download it. So that suffers from the web bug, which is you can provide one of these URLs. The URL can have all sorts of tracking information, but even if it doesn't, even if the URL itself is tracking free, that means that when people from other providers go and like download that link, either automatically or manually, the sender's provider is going to find out their IP address. They're going to potentially get a lot of other information about the number of people and the number of users in the room, a bunch of stuff, right? So the download proxy is designed to prevent that. And we also want to prevent open proxies. So we don't want the provider of the hub doesn't want to just say, okay, yeah, here's a proxy. You can use it to download anything. You go use it to download, the Lord of the Rings, the following, copyright protected stuff, some CSAM over here, some like a terrorist manifesto over there, hey, go nuts. Or just use it for DDoS, right? So the idea here is that the attachment policy in the room, so this would be something, there's already an issue in room policy to add this, has a list of each provider that's represented in the room. So if I'm Alice and Alice is in the provider A.com, the hub is provider hub.net, and Bob is in provider B.org, that there's a table for the room in the room policy that says for attachments from A.com, the server the only domain name that is allowed for those attachments is storage.a.com. It's the left-hand side of the HTTPS URL for that. For hub.net, it's assets.hub.net. And it could be set up so that you could delegate this to something else. It could potentially be delegated so that all of these things point to the hub. How you would do that is out of scope, but this has the capability to do that. Now, what's important here is that if I'm a client from b.org and I don't think that my local configuration doesn't agree that my attachments are assets.b.org.hub.net, then I'm going to be like, no, this is wrong. Like, I can leave the group. I can, write to my congressperson, whatever. But I don't need to continue to participate in the group. All right. So that's a very important check on the client side. And then on the hub side, the hub is going to have a list of all of the, all of these storage endpoints on all the providers that they work with. And if they get something coming to the download proxy endpoint that is not from one of these domains, then they're going to refuse it. Okay, this PR also has something else very important, which is it talks about using oblivious HTTP. So this basically allows a downloading user to go through an oblivious HTTP relay on their local provider, to contact the hub's OHTTP gateway, that then contacts the download proxy endpoint, which is on the same also on the hub. So this means that the hub doesn't know for this particular download, it doesn't know what room, it doesn't know which user, it doesn't know which, it just knows which provider the request is coming from. It knows it's coming from one of the providers that it has a peering relationship with. So my recommendation here, after Marvin made a comment that he didn't think that we should require OHTTP here. And I think that this makes sense. So my proposal here is that we make the download proxy endpoint mandatory to implement on the hub. We make the implementation of, the availability of an OHTTP gateway and OHTTP relay mandatory to implement on the hub and local providers respectively. But then the clients get to decide what they do with respect to downloading. They can either fetch the attachments directly, not very safe, but if they really just want to do that, they can. They can use the download proxy endpoint, or they can use the full OHTTP method, and that would be recommended. What do y'all think about that?
Yeah, Rafa Robert speaking. So I love Oblivious HTTP, so I'm a little bit biased here. The issue I see is that we have a lot of degrees of freedom with that. And I'm not sure we want that. I'm not sure we need that either, in the sense that so far the consensus has been that the hub is always in charge for everything. And the relay servers, they have the least possible amount of say in the whole protocol. But now, essentially, we open a can of worms by allowing, as you just said, different ways of uploading attachments, downloading attachments, maybe at the same time. So my first question would be, why don't we limit that to the hub?
Well, the main reason is that the hub is likely to be willing to host a room, but not to allow uploads of arbitrary files from clients for which they have no authentication properties. That I've heard that over and over again from operators, from folks that run real providers.
That sounds reasonable. So that would bring me to the next question. Why don't we want authentication for attachments? Why is it not reasonable that the hub can actually decide whether it accepts an attachment during the upload process and also checks during the download process if the requester is actually an authorized client or device or member of the room?
Yeah, I mean, my impression is that I still don't think that hub providers are willing to do that, even if it's authenticated, because there's a lot of issues with respect to quotas and things like that. So, like, I can imagine that you can load as big of a thing as you want on as your local provider will let you. The hub, on the other hand, particularly if it's offering the service for free, it's less inclined to offer storage of an arbitrarily large video, say, from some user that they don't have a paying or at least account relationship with.
Yeah, but if it's authenticated, they can enforce a quota on that, just like a local provider would do. There would be no difference, effectively.
Right, but if I have a local provider and my local provider allows me to store a big video and the hub does not, then that means that I can't send a big video. And that's... But
why is that a problem? If that's a group policy that a video has to be capped to 100 megabytes...
It's not really the group policy. The hub, if the attachment is stored in on the local system, then the hub doesn't care if it's arbitrarily large.
What do you mean with local system?
If it's stored on the, like, if Alice uploads the file to a.com and it's big, and Alice has a quota to do that on a.com, like, particularly if it's an enterprise system, and then there's a room that's, like, some consumer system that it's hosted on a consumer system, then Alice can send that attachment, and that attachment will just work fine. The hub doesn't have anything to object about there. There's a big video. People can download it or not.
So what? Okay, so you're saying that essentially every relay server or every provider can set their own quota limits, but then the hub still has to accept that when downloading. So providers check on upload, but if we have oblivious HTTP, for example, then
they don't need to pay for a disk to do that. They can just stream it.
Right. They don't have to pay for storage, but they do have to pay for egress.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think this is pretty consistent with the way these systems work that do federation right now. There's a fairly small number of them, but Slack, for example. So.
Okay, I mean, I guess that's a good starting point then. I'm still a little worried about the complexity here.
Okay.
Because you have a
So,
number of
but just to
combinations
summarize, your concrete proposal is, let's provide some new authentication mechanism that allows the hub to get these uploads. And I think that there are some privacy issues about that, but I mean, it could be balanced by some other things. So.
Yeah. So to be specific, the alternative that I had in mind was exactly that. The hub is in charge of managing quotas, managing disk storage, in the sense that it already agreed to host the group. So it's fine with also offering disk space, essentially. And can enforce quotas. And there could still be a proxy because, like, Alice's device doesn't want to talk to the hub directly. As Richard keeps saying in every MIMI meeting, we have a C to S to S to S to C architecture. So we do need the proxy here.
Yeah, I just want to point out that there are 3 other people in the queue right now. So
sorry. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So concretely, that would be my alternative.
Okay. Marvin.
Yeah, Marvin Risfeld. I'm a bit surprised about making the OHTTP relay mandatory and recommended to the client, because I think there's typically a rather tight coupling between local provider and client. So if the client does not implement it, it makes, and it is a tight coupling to a specific local provider with the client, it makes no sense to require the local provider to implement it.
Okay. Other than that, what do you think of the proposal on the bottom there?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'm not a big fan of making OHTTP required on the client server side here, because I'm not required, but even recommended is not a big fan, but I see the benefit of using OHTTP here. So it's, I guess, better than nothing.
Okay. Alyssa.
How do these policies get configured to begin with?
So the hub provider is going to have a list of its, peer, like when it sets up a peering relationship with its providers, presumably that's going to be configured by admins of those 2 systems, and then
okay, it's completely offline.
It's just going to be like shoved into the, when you add somebody, it's going to be shoved into the room policy, and then it's up to the clients to verify, like, oh yeah, that looks like the one that I know.
Okay. I guess I have 2 observations. One is just, it feels like there are a bunch of different like requirements of different types that are aiming to be met with this like set of potential options or solutions. And it would be good to sort of articulate those, right? There's the privacy ones, there's the storage ones, and then there's the like liability for the content ones. And it just feels like it will stand the test of time better if we explain, like, this is why we have each of these options. And in some cases, they're like commingled a little bit, but like tease that apart. And then my last question or sort of observation is like the OHTTP usage, the 2119 keyword feels like a should but we know you won't kind of situation. Like there's like what's even the point of saying this is the one that's recommended? Like people are going to do what they want to do, right?
Well, I mean, if it's a must implement on the hub, then any local provider that wants to take advantage of it can. And I think it's
right. But if
to the
like
extent that it's like that, it means that my competitor is going to be able to harvest less data about my users. I think there may be an economic incentive for some providers to do that.
mm, okay. Okay, thanks.
DKG.
Hi, thanks. I think Alyssa said what I was going to say about teasing the motivations for the different options apart. I share Raphael's concern about the amount of complexity and the range of options. If we have fewer options, it's better. I'm also going to relay from the chat Timo's question here about whether we have a media retention policy for Mimi. It seems to me that, you know, if you want to work around all of this, you can just stuff your attachments into your messages, right? And the hub is going to have to relay large messages that are up to the size of whatever your size limit is. And the hub, since it's all end-to-end encrypted, you know, what are you going to do? The server isn't going to know whether there's an attachment in here or someone that's happening to, you know, paste Moby Dick into the text chat. So it does seem to me like the hub is on the hook here for storage. The hub is on the hook for hosting the content. The hub is on the hook for the bandwidth no matter what. It does seem a little simpler to me to just say, hey, folks, the hub is on the hook for the attachments as well. And then we get it looks to me like we have a much more collapsed state space here, which is simpler to reason about and has a sort of narrower set of properties.
Yeah, I mean, DKG, I think the main thing that I would say in response to that about the hub being on the hook for the transfer is transferring through the network is that like a typical message is going to be, you know, kilobytes or maybe small number of megabytes, but these attachments, they can easily be, you know, hundreds of megabytes or tens of, you know, single digit gigabytes, maybe tens of gigabytes. So, well, Richard.
Yeah, at some point, just like upload it to Google Drive and call it a day. I mean, I do find DKG's reasoning persuasive there. I mean, in general, it does make me kind of sad to load more obligations on the hub, but it seems like a very dramatically simplifying assumption here. I actually queued to ask about oblivious HTTP and whether we need all of that machinery here, because we're only ever making one specific sort of request. So I kind of wonder if we can do away with all the OHTTP stuff and just have a message that is sent from the follower server to the hub that says like, hey, could you do a GET request to this URL and hand me the contents?
Mm. Okay. All right. I think there's, yeah, please put these either on the list or on the issue. And let me carry on here. Or on the PR rather. Okay, so in terms of issues that are left, we have two of those that already have PRs. I'm going to cover one of these real quick. And the I just want specifically, I want to call out number 26 and number 25 and request that we close these. I was meaning to send this to the list, but I did not get around to it. But I will do that after this meeting. But one of these says, you know, like, what transport protocol are we using? Well, you know, the draft has been using HTTPS for, you know, 2 years, basically. So there's no concrete counter proposal. I propose we close this. Likewise with the binary encoding, we're using TLS presentation language. Same thing, no concrete counter proposal. I can imagine a couple of things that would have worked, but that are not really, like in vogue at the moment. Like XMPP, yeah. So anyway, in the absence of any concrete counter proposal, we have a protocol. There have been some initial implementation experience. Say let's close this and move on. Let's see, timestamp integrity for history. Yeah, that's an issue that I'll discuss on the list. But basically, it sure would be nice if when you we've had a few cases where we've talked about what happens if you're getting some messages via message history, which is not immediately in scope, but it would be nice if somebody sends a message that the stuff that the server adds is actually signed by the server, so that somebody who has the history can verify that the timestamp wasn't modified, that the frank wasn't modified. So that's what 114 is about. Figuring out versioning. I promise to get a concrete proposal out there, but anybody else who has an idea, feel free. Do we need Knox? I don't hear anybody jumping up and down saying we need this. I think we could add it later. So, kind of going on. Unless somebody wants to propose something at least at the bar napkin level, or say like, hey, Rowan, could you please come up with something? I think this is really important. I'm gonna just ignore that. There are a couple of things that are non-normative. Most of these are kind of chores. I started work on a Mimi threat model. I got some help from Deirdre. I've got, but if you're interested in participating in that, please come talk to me. Raphael.
Yeah, really quickly regarding Knox, I thought we had some consensus last time that we do find them important.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but in terms of like a mechanism, yeah, sure.
Yeah, we're lacking the mechanism, clearly.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for keeping me honest on that, by the way. Arbitrary state. So this is I believe it's our oldest issue. Thanks, DKG, for commenting on this one ages ago. I think that we've mostly got this covered. So the new MLS app data update proposal and the app data dictionary extension allows for applications to efficiently put arbitrary state in MLS group context messages and to efficiently update them. And to also put that state in key packages, leaf nodes, and group infos. There's also an app ephemeral proposal that allows members to send arbitrary state to a group that doesn't need to be kept persistent. Like you could use that, for example, for a new joiner to say, hey, by the way, here's my join code. This seems to satisfy most of the requests that's in issue number 23, with one exception, which is, what about state for members only that is not shared with the hub? Well, we could encrypt that and put it in the group context, and then leave the key distribution to another, undefined mechanism. One mechanism that we could use is sending a private message to the room that says, by the way, here's the key for unlocking this stuff. However, we have somebody else that has a need to solve that problem, and that's the minimal metadata rooms. And so I introduce Raphael.
Yeah, this is going to be really quick, hopefully. Essentially, just a little recap of what has been happening during the interims and what we did last time. So next slide, please. So the whole idea here was to introduce a mode where metadata can be further protected in the rooms. Specifically, what that means is that The hub should not be able to identify who the members in a group are. So first of all, that is specific to the MLS group, but obviously it also extends to the authorization list and to the policy if there is one. So yeah, this is a bit of an abstract image, like showing that the hub can still see participants, but they only have pseudonyms. They don't have the identity that other members in the room will see. So next slide, please. So yeah, the big change here to the protocol was simply that we introduced the pseudonymous credential. So we can still see that there is a client and a user, and they're now pseudonymous, and the actual identity is just a ciphertext. And so the other members in the room need the key to be able to decrypt that, but the hub can still enforce any kind of policy and authorization. So that was the change. Next slide, please. So we also identified a number of working items. One is that we are still generally lacking the notion of what a connection is in Mimi. There was some early consensus that that is something we want to have. And this would be a requirement for this to work, actually. And by connection, what we said we need is a mechanism where essentially two users initially connect and approve that connection, as opposed to, you know, just being magically thrown into a group and being able to communicate. So very much what you know in terms of UX from messengers like Signal and WhatsApp, where you send a connection request that gets approved, and then you have an established connection. So this is necessary to actually share some key material that is needed to encrypt the identity of the pseudonyms. What is also not in the protocol yet is how we synchronize the key material. That should be relatively trivial in the sense that we have MLS for that. We can derive as many keys as we want. And what is also missing there is that we said we want to use tree wrap as a way to encrypt the real identities, if you will, at rest, while preserving FS and PCS guarantees as good as possible. We also need to specify how, or if there's any changes to how key packages are being published. And by the way, when you see MMR, I think that is the latest iteration on the naming. So that stands for metadata minimal room. So yeah, I mean, key packages are still just key packages. The difference is that they do contain an encrypted credential. Lastly, we have to look into how pre-authorization works. In principle, we think it should work like it works now. The only difference is that the server doesn't know who's who, but can still recognize clients and users across MLS epochs because the pseudonyms do not change. So anything is enforceable. So yeah, that's it. Any questions, Ron?
Hi, it's Rowan. I'm trying to understand if for the external commit case or external joiner case, with the stuff that you're envisioning, it's possible or isn't possible for the external joiner to be able to get the real identities immediately without somebody else taking some action.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that depends. So external commits are generally possible, but it depends on the scenario. So if we talk about the Knox scenario, that is probably not possible because you don't have any relationship with anyone in the room. So this is contradictory to the fact that we do need a connection. If we do external commits in order to add a new client of an existing user in the room, that is absolutely possible because the key material could just be exchanged between the clients directly.
Okay. I mean, I just wanted to say, you know, discussed this, the general problem over the last few days with a few other people. And personally, I think from a requirements perspective, I think it would be okay for us to say that somebody who's an external joiner, they might not get the true identity or, like encrypted information right away. It may be perfectly okay that somebody else has to go, somebody else's client behind the scenes has to go do some work, and then they see that information kind of show up a little bit later. So I'm curious if if there's like any strong disagreement about that, but I think we're already doing a lot here. So if it means that the client doesn't necessarily get the secret information right away, I think that's acceptable.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. I mean, essentially we have two options. One option is we say we do require a connection, and therefore we do not support the use case where new users can just join a room, and so we will not have knocks and stuff like that. And that might be okay as a trade-off. The other trade-off that Ron is now proposing is that it's okay to join a room, but you do not discover immediately who's who in that room. You can still participate in the sense that you're a member of the MLS group, etc. But it takes a little while. And maybe that could be improved by sharing the key material through yet another mechanism that we haven't defined. Any more questions? No, thank you.
Okay, it's me again. Ding, 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 ding.
You should be good.
Oh yeah. Okay. So, so for Mimi protocol, what's next? Is there any other? So it sounds like Knox. There was some interest in Knox. So it sounds like we need to come up with some concrete proposal for Knox. We need to sort out what we do, what the requirements. I mean, really, the download proxy thing comes down to requirements. So we need to settle on what the requirements are, and then it should be pretty straightforward for us to, we got all the pieces we need to go and come up with a solution for any of the requirements that have been discussed to date. We just need to pick some, and so I really would like to have this ready for working group last call by Madrid. So please come and help. Please review, please implement, and please, tell me what you think about the various requirements for, what are the requirements for downloads? What are the requirements for Knox? And we'll get it sorted. Alyssa.
Yeah, just, I mean, on the timing, like we really need to do some interop on this. Like we need people to implement this and find all the problems. So I hope that starts happening.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. Like it would help build confidence that this is, ready to be cast in stone as an RFC if we had some actual code in the ground and had actually, lived experience with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there is some code, but like we need more of it, and we need to start doing interop for sure. Raphael.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. So we are implementing parts of it. We've done the content format to a large degree thanks to Timo's work. We have parts of the protocol because it was prior work on our side essentially. But we don't have exactly the draft implemented as such. But yeah, we'd be happy if there were more people and we could interrupt or at least talk about it, exchange ideas.
Yeah, I'm aware of an implementation that's doing directory, straightforward part of find internal, key package, group info, update, submit, fan out, and is not doing reporting and franking yet, but is doing, I don't know, obviously isn't doing download proxy or Knox yet, but is doing the sort of the core stuff for sure, and like a couple of the other peripheral things.
Yeah, so given that I hear both of you kind of enumerating parts of the protocol that you're implementing. It seems like, you know, and also sort of in the spirit of incrementalism we started this working group with. What we did in MLS, we had kind of a ladder of test cases, so that you could validate that you were doing subroutines of the protocol correctly. So it seems like that sort of strategy would be helpful here. If someone, you know, like an interested grad student or someone who's just starting to hack on this, like it's a good way to like validate that you're starting, you know, get your implementation going and kind of ratchet yourself up.
Yep.
So that would be a super helpful thing, and seek me out if you'd like any guidance on how we did that for MLS.
Cool. Okay. If there's no more on protocol, I'm going to go to content. Timo.
Maybe one question on the peering relations between servers. Can you hear me?
You're super faint. Can you please talk louder or move the
Yes,
microphone closer?
Am I louder now?
Great.
Yes, okay. On the peering relation between servers, does it have to be full mesh in a room? Does every server have a peering relation with every server? Or is it just every server has a connection to the hub? Does the question make sense?
Yeah, so the architecture document specifically says that for example, you know, to take a real world example, Apple might peer with Meta and Google might peer with Meta, but Apple and Google don't peer together, or you know, some combination thereof. So that's in the requirements and in the architecture.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. There are really only 3 content slides for content. So the first is that there was a massive amount of work that went into this document since 05. So for anybody who was not paying attention, excuse me, might have one more in me. So there's a new construction for message ID. So message ID is a hash of some stuff, and so the content, the sender, the room, and the salt, which is also in the message. So that made obviously all of the examples that were in the draft before wrong, and as I did for SDCOT, I wrote scripts to go and generate all these things and make CBOR and EDN, and those things actually do verify. So like if you run the script, it generates some CBOR for all of the messages. The message IDs that are referred to in the other messages, those are valid message IDs. And the EDN that's in the directory and the CBOR that's in the directory, if you convert the EDN to CBOR and compare them, they match. So that was a lot of work for the third multi-part example. In terms of stuff related to timestamps, there's some implied CBOR for what comes back from the hub. So now that can be a choice of either an integer number of milliseconds since the start of the Unix epoch, or it can be, if it's a tag, then that means it's a CBOR extended time. And there's an RFC that describes that. So that gives us flexibility if in the future we want to give more granularity. That gives us a way to sort of escape hatch into that without changing the default, which is right now just shove the integer number of milliseconds in there. There were lots of consistency fixes. Also, all of the examples now use Mimi style URIs. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in my last slide in Mimi identity. We removed the last seen mechanism. I had a discussion with Cullen about this. He seems to be the only person who actually wanted that mechanism. And I think we've come up with a reasonable alternative way for him to get what he wants. But anybody else that did not notice this and really wants last seen, please let me know. And I'd like to hear from you. Ideally, I'd like there to be nobody that does want to say that, but I'd rather know now than later. The delivery report timestamps weren't doing anything useful, so we removed those. There was an issue about basically it was possible that an implementation could easily double render when we've got parts that refer to other parts inside of multi-part Mimi content. That was clarified. There is still one open issue about that, but I'll get to that in the next slide. Did some IANA registrations of Mimi extensions, fixed a bunch of typos, fixed a bunch of stuff in the CDDL. And finally, very proud to say that I managed to upgrade this document in place so that I added Martin Thompson's draft template to a directory that previously did not have it, and the editor's copy link works. So that was really nice. Okay, so I think that there are 4 issues that I would like to propose won't fix, and I would like us to propose this in the room, and if nobody objects, I want to close these as won't fix, and it can always be reopened. They can always be added by extensions later if we need them. So these are things that are not really super common in messaging systems. They're available in some messaging systems, but I don't think it really fits with the charter description of what we, of what is like 70% of messaging systems implement this thing. So those are smart timestamps, spoiler syntax, expiring messages that don't use either absolute or relative times, and then finally, interactive things, including polls. I think polls are very common, but the way in which they work, I'm not sure that we have. I think that this is an excellent thing for an extension to Mimi, and I think we really want to get the document like out the door, get some implementation experience, and then I think this is a fairly easy thing to either implement using an extension to Mimi content or as a completely separate media type. Would anyone here go for it, Richard?
I can't believe you're proposing that we not respect people's time zones. No, I think these all seem like optional add-on things we can do in extensions later.
So Timo, since you were responsible for some of these, I would like your comment, please.
Yeah, I'm okay with doing this in extensions, but I think we should specify how we connect these extensions to the Markdown syntax. For example, in the issues, I wrote the syntax with the inline image where you put a different URL inside of it. Like we could use that as an optional extension point and put an example maybe.
Okay.
In the proxy.
All right. So I can offline. I'm happy to work with you to come up with a way that we can a couple paragraphs about how to use the extensions map in the 6th or 7th element of the Mimi content array. Okay, so the last issue here is basically how we've got issue number 30 and issue number 49. The discussion in issue 30 covers the majority of this, but there is also some stuff in 49. Timo kind of fleshed out a concrete counter proposal, which is remarkably, both simpler and less feature capable. And so again, we've come down to a requirements question. So my working implicit assumption when I started this was that we want to be able to do the same, if somebody can do this, can do like pretty complicated multi-part stuff in mail, and then we can't do this, we can't express these kinds of things in our modern messaging system, I think that I think that is, we're probably not allowing allowing for the kinds of things that I think people are going to want to build in the future.
I mean, I admit I do not know the details here. I just want to push back on the general idea of trying to achieve feature parity with email. Does not, like, all of the stuff that email has accreted over its 4 decades of life does not seem like the right objective.
I mean, I did not mean specifically everything that email does. What I meant is that you can have, you can have multiple layers of multi-part choices and inline content and things like that. And we can do that in what's in the draft right now. I think that there are some examples of things that you might want to be able to do. Marvin posted some things. I posted some examples there, so I think the question here is, what do we want? So I think that from my opinion is that the mechanism that's in there is implementable. And, I know at least one implementation that did this. So yeah, implementers, if you want to say something about this, this would be a great time to talk about it. I don't think we're going to get complete agreement about this in the room, but I'm going to pass over to DKG.
DKG, email enthusiast. I want to second what Richard said about not aiming for full feature parity with email, and in particular the part you said, oh, not full parity, just arbitrary structure with multi-part nested. That stuff is it's a disaster. It's a disaster in email, and I don't think you should aim for it. I'm not saying that we should not have attachments. I think a message that has some things attached to it is entirely reasonable, but the nested multi-part stuff in email is not clearly interoperable. We continue to find user agents that behave in different ways. And the flexibility that you have with all the different ways you can construct stuff, I won't name any names for particular examples of things that seem obvious when you look at the structure, but either are generated completely off base or have an actual decent structure, but are rendered in a way that's off base. The idea that we could just make this super generic thing and then expect every implementer to know how to do it has turned out to be false over the decades. So choose what you want, specify it narrowly, make sure everybody knows how to do that thing, but don't go for an arbitrary recursive descent Turing complete grammar.
Before you hang up there, there are 3 examples, multi-part examples in the draft. If you haven't looked at them, I would be delighted if you would look at them and then give me your impression of which of these you think are actually useful, or where you can come up with a use case where you think that we should be able to do this in instant messaging, in Mimi content. Because I think the way in which we're going to resolve, like, this is the right level of flexibility is by giving some concrete examples. So for example, the most complicated of those 3rd examples, if you're like, no, we don't need to be able to do that, and we get a consensus on that, then that can inform the technical decision. But if we just say, like, it should be as simple as possible, but no simpler, I don't think that we're going to get enough information to know. Like, I think we're going to have some concrete yes/no use cases.
I agree with you. We need a specific answer about where to draw the line. I don't have a concrete answer for you here, but I will take a look. This is in
it's
number
in Mimi
49.
content. It's in the current draft of
Mimi
content
okay.
itself. Yeah.
I will try to review that.
Cool. Timo.
Yeah, so in issue 49, you wrote a message that, what about text message with a contact attachment, so a vCard, that references a profile picture inside it? So having an attachment that itself has an attachment. And do you know if email actually supports this? Because this seems like so much work to do. Because the profile picture inside of it could be multi-part too. So you could have different attachments with different languages, and it seems like so much effort to do this. And the proposal I wrote in issue 49, I think, covers a lot of syntax, and yeah, I would like to have more eyes on that and more examples which show what doesn't work with that implementation.
Marvin, do you want to jump in here at all?
Yeah. So I mean, I wrote in the issue of Gmo. So I think, like generally, I think we can probably remove some features, but it's not trivial to find these things that we can remove without actually adding complexity. So something that I think we can probably remove is the possibility for attachments to be picked by language, because I don't think that's a really relevant feature. And if you need it, then you can still do it in the text part basically, and not on the attachment logic. So that would be possible, but right now attachments are in the current draft. Attachments and text are basically considered mostly the same. So we would maybe even add complexity if we try to do it. I see the benefit of Timo's approach to completely split the two. So we have attachments completely separated from the body, or whatever you want to call it. But for implementers, it might be easier if it is the other way around. If you can basically have interleaving text element, attachment, text element, if you want, if that's what you want to display. So again, yeah, some of the things seem to be easier the way it's currently, and some other things seem to be harder. And complexity here is an issue.
I agree with your assessment there.
Yeah. So I mean, I also did an implementation not of the current draft, but of an older draft. But I think it was reasonable to implement. But yeah, I can see that some people don't like it. Another option that I think is possible would be to reduce the feature set here and basically allow people, or say people, that they can just throw in an RFC822 message into Mimi, and then they can do their arbitrary complex stuff.
I really, really, really don't want to do that.
Yeah, but I mean, if you say that if people really have like a super complex use case that is not covered, then they can still do that, and it will probably not be very interoperable. But yeah. I don't see an easy way to reduce the feature set of what we have like reduce the complexity of what we have right now without significantly harming the feature set. And even removing some features would not be easily without changing, or maybe even increasing the complexity.
Okay. All right, we'll take it to list and to GitHub. Okay, so it's really just, I mean, this is the main open issue at this point. So I do have one note here, which is that in terms of maturity, I know at least 3 implementations of Mimi content, the format itself. We haven't done any UROP testing with them, but I don't think that would necessarily be hard. But for delivery reports, I don't know anybody that's actually implemented it. So maybe this could be moved to another draft. I don't think it necessarily there's any reason why it needs to be in this document. I'll talk with the chairs about that. But I think once this one open issue is closed, I think that this is ready for an immediate working group last call. Chairs, any comment? Alyssa, hello.
Hey, I mean, I feel a little bit the same way. Like, I would love for people to send messages back and forth using this format and make sure that it is meeting their needs. Is that happening? Are you just sending them to yourself, Rowan? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, sending messages to myself is working.
Put it on your tombstone. Yeah.
I could make I could make a screenshot if you like, but yeah.
No. I want you to send them to somebody else.
Right. The problem is there's no protocol with which to do that at the moment, so it could be a little bit challenging.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's what I guess about the timing. Like maybe we take the documents together, because we need to have implementations to really feel confident about the other documents. So when we have a protocol and a format, we working group last call them together, assuming we will have had some implementation experience. How does that strike you?
I'm okay with that. Richard gives a thumbs up.
Okay, I can't see it. Richard's thumb is not in the camera.
In the video, yeah.
Yeah.
It was
Okay. That was good. I'm starting to fall asleep here, so now I'm awake again.
Okay, back to okay. So I'm going to carry on to room policy here. This one is much less mature, but it is implemented. So changes since last IETF. So the roles, capabilities, and pre-authorized users that were in draft main Mimi app components that we discussed at like 3 or 4 interims. This got moved into Mimi room policy, and all the contradictory text, and I think but most of the contradictory text and mechanism about roles and pre-authorization that got moved out, and this other stuff got moved in. And there's a small number of issues on here. So, you know, based on the discussion, whatever ends up happening with like the download proxy, we need to update an appropriate set of policies there. That's an issue. There's somebody asked me to note that subrooms on the same hub are on the I think it was Timo, subrooms are on the same hub as a parent room. That's just writing some text. There needs to be a lot more description of like what's a ban and what's a kick. I can propose a couple of different things that way, so we can have a kind of yes/no questions for the working group. Briefly, like if you have not seen these slides, there's a set of role definitions. It says for each role, like here are some capabilities, here are some constraints about how many minimum and maximum participants and active participants you can have, and here are like allowed role transitions. So for example, you can say like, yeah, you can move like somebody who has the change user role permission that's in role 1, that's coming from role 1, which is banned, can move to role 2, which is an ordinary user, right? So an admin that has like somebody who's in the admin role could use this to define the legal mappings from various places. This unifies also how authorization works for external senders. So if you have like the hub wants to be able to delete fired users or users whose accounts were deleted or suspended, it can be as a policy enforcer, it can have its own role that isn't ever allowed to be an active participant in the room, and is only allowed to like remove things and move them to the banned list and stuff like that. So these constraints are really nice because it prevents policy enforcers from becoming active participants. Finally, there's a pre-authorized users list. The way this works is if you have somebody who's trying to join, they're neither in the participant list nor have a join code, then they can try to see if they show up in this as a pre-authorized user. And so basically you step through the roles, the rules, the pre-authorized rules one by one. And if all of the required claims are satisfied in a particular line, and that's the first one that you match, then you get that particular role. This is also used if somebody is already in the participant list and they use the change own role, for example, to try to become a moderator or an admin, after they're added as a regular user, but that has to be a capability that is allowed for the ordinary user, regular user role in order to do this. Anyway, as I said, there's an implementation. Hoping that the implementation is going to get open sourced pretty soon, hopefully this summer. And yeah, I encourage people to ask me about it, to try and implement it, to ask questions, post issues. That's it for that. Timo.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I will probably implement room policy in the next weeks or so.
Fantastic. Great. Okay, and for my last topic, Mimi identity. Do we need this draft? So this draft started off as a survey of the problem space, basically. However, it talks about a number of issues. I think it exposes some issues that we do need to solve and we need to actively do something about. So hypothetically, if every provider was using exactly the same credential format in MLS, this would be pretty simple. But that doesn't seem likely. There seems to be a large proliferation of both MLS credential types, and even within, for example, the X509 type, different rules about what somebody sticks in a subject alt name or doesn't, and like what the issuer format is, et cetera, right? All the usual RFC 5280 stuff. It's not easy. So we have I made a list here of things that clients need to be able to do in order to work with systems that have different credential types. The first is that each client needs to be able to validate all the credential types in the room. So that means they need to have a way to manage the trust root for an issuer, deal with any revocation or status list that might be associated with that particular credential type. That's the standard kind of MLS level, but then at the application level, they also need to be able to go find the signature public key that's in each credential and make sure that that's the same as the signature public key in the leaf node. They should be able to recognize if the same client shows up in an external commit to go and replace itself. For example, if it totally lost its state, if it was offline for, like 3 months and stopped receiving commits, and it doesn't know what epic it is, and it's just like, help, I need to go get a group info and rejoin. We should be able to recognize that that's the same client and not a new one. By the way, this need to be able to recognize the same client. This is specifically mentioned in MLS architecture as something that the AS needs to be able to do. We need to be able to finally construct a canonical participant identifier from each credential. Well, I've seen some of these credentials, and I think that they don't necessarily, even map up in terms of, basic things like character set, like is one a URI and another is not, or maybe some include a domain and don't include a domain. So having a canonical way, having a mapping where you can take whatever somebody uses and map it into something that everybody can use as a comparison format. For example, a Mimi URI. I think that we need to be able to do that. Richard.
So this analysis seems a little confused to me in a couple of ways that I'm not going to unpack right now. But I think we do need to answer the question at the top. Like we do need some sort of identity thingy here. We're going to have identifiers, Mimi identifiers for users that will need to get authenticated. And so I think we'll need to have some sort of baseline credential type and some way to tie in extra stuff. So yeah, I think it might not have exactly you were correct that this doc was intended as a survey starting point because we did it right at the beginning of the working group. Now that we have more of a protocol in place, now is exactly the right time to be revisiting this. And so I don't think there's a need for a ton of innovation here. We just need to take a few piece parts and make some things that talk about the identifiers we have here and figure out what the general shape is for who's going to authenticate what the ASs that might be involved would be. So yeah, I think we might need to kind of reboot this draft, but we still need a draft here.
Thanks. Okay, and then the last thing I've got listed here is, this is just so that the participant list logic can work. So whatever thing we put in the participant list, we need to be able to have everybody agree on what that is for a particular user or client, for a particular participant. But I think that there's also an expectation that if there's ever a display name or a handle for a participant, that we have a way to make sure that if I'm dealing with some other system, that I can actually show a display name if one is available. Or I can at least say this is, unverified. This is the unverified display name, but it was the one that was asserted by this particular, user or provider. That's all I got. Thank you very much. Any other questions, issues?
Okay, last call for the mic queue. Last call for the mic queue. Nobody? So, last thing today is Brendan. Excuse me.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm going to pass you slide control. You should get buttons to click now.
Okay, thank you. But yeah, so I am going to present a draft called MLS subgroups, which is something that I wrote kind of a long time ago, but kind of trying to drive it to a conclusion. For background, this is the way that we sort of typically think about MLS groups, and the MLS working group is you have one big sort of group, and maybe at the application layer, you have some sort of concept of a user, or you have users in this group. But from the perspective of the MLS stack, you don't actually have like some user abstraction that's a member of the group. The MLS stack just sees individual user devices as members of the group. So it's going to see, Alice's phone is a member, Alice's laptop is a different member, Bob's laptop is a different member. And I believe this was more of like a simplifying assumption that we did in the MLS working group to kind of get the protocol done, rather than a reflection of how people actually want their encrypted messaging to work. So to kind of expand on that, the specific problems with this approach is, number one, because you have all of your devices essentially in every group that you're in, maintaining consistency between all of these groups can become expensive pretty quickly. So if you add some new device to your account, it's not just this one operation of adding this new device to your account. You actually have to go through every group that you're in and add that device to every single group. And you maybe are in a lot of groups, and so that's a lot of work for you to do. And then the second point is that it provides pretty weak privacy guarantees. So obviously, if you're going through and adding a new device, everybody can see, oh, you got a new device. If you remove a device, everybody can see that. And actually, kind of on top of that, whenever you send a message, people can see which specific device you sent that message from. So the message says it's from Alice's phone, or maybe the message is from like Alice's work laptop. And then because I see Alice is sending messages from her work laptop right now, I know she's not home. And so I can go rob her or something. That's a new privacy leak that you don't have in any other messenger that I'm aware of. So yeah, to fix that, this draft proposes moving to a kind of new model where you have all of the devices for a single user. We put all of these devices in, a single group, and they use that group to drive a shared secret state. And then they use that shared secret state to drive an MLS virtual client. And the MLS virtual client is what actually gets added to other groups with other users who are maybe also virtual clients. Rowan?
Hey, Brendan. Clarifying question. So, I mean, this isn't just the room. This isn't room Alice. This is room like room Alice for team chat, right? These are separate Alice rooms per room, or separate Alice groups per group MLS group.
No, that's not the case. So let me say, you have one group where all of Alice's devices drive the shared secret state that they use to drive some virtual client. That is called a subgroup, where all the devices are in the group. Users only have one subgroup, and they use that to drive this virtual client and all of the groups that the virtual client is in.
Okay, so it's not really a subgroup. It's a identity client group, say.
Yeah, subgroup is not a good name.
Okay, and so just to point out the obvious, if Alice has multiple personas or identities, then we want those to each have their own identity client group. So that if Alice is in the parent-teacher association context, she can use some identity, and if she's in her fetish, whips and chains group, that is kept separate.
Yeah, you think of it as like an account. If Alice has separate accounts for different things, then these are separate subgroups as well. But what's really nice is that this protocol or the document describes how to have these subgroups drive these virtual clients in a way that preserves all of the security properties of MLS. So it's still fully post-compromise secure. You have full forward secrecy. You have these nice privacy properties where people can't see which device you're using. And you also have the operational simplicity of whenever Alice adds a new device, that's just one operation in a subgroup. She doesn't have to do something in every group that she's in. So it's a lot simpler for her to actually operate. If you think about how you would actually apply this kind of model to Mimi, so the general pattern is that you have one user or one account. That account owns multiple devices, and then all those devices participate in the single MLS group to drive their virtual client. And this is all localized to a single provider. So Alice is a user of this provider. All of her devices are registered with that provider, and the subgroup is provided entirely by that provider. So it's all localized and simple. And then I didn't say this earlier, but the groups where you have multiple users talking to each other, these are called supergroups. And the way that you would actually do the sort of network piping for a supergroup is Alice sends a message. She sends it with her phone. Her phone sends that message to her local provider. The local provider sends it to the hub provider. If the hub provider accepts it, the hub fans it out to all of the other providers that are maybe involved in this group. And then Alice's local provider fans the message out to all of her local devices as well. So she sent this message just with her one phone, but now this message has been sent to the hub, fanned out, and also routed to all of her devices that she owns as well. So they all have access to that same message. The kind of killer feature of how this draft works is that it doesn't require any changes to the MLS wire format, which means that providers can decide individually whether or not they want to implement it. If we were to do wire format changes, you'd have to decide if you either want to mandate support from everyone so that they can all understand these new wire format changes, or you'd have to accept the possibility of downgrade, where if a user on provider A wants to talk to a user on provider B, and provider A supports the draft, but provider B doesn't, provider A would have to actually strip their user of the privacy protections to let their user talk to the user on provider B, and that's no good. The only downside of what comes out of requiring no changes to the wire format is that we kind of have to abuse an MLS internal variable to hide some extra information, and that variable is only 32 bits. So that has the effect of restricting subgroup size to only 2 to the 32 devices, ideally less. I don't personally have 2 to the 32 devices, so this does work for me, but I don't know if that's maybe not true for other people, you know? But yeah, anyways, the reason that I'm presenting the draft today is not actually to get feedback on the specific draft. It's to get feedback on the general idea of subgroups. And I picture that feedback kind of falling into one of 3 categories. The first one is either, you know, I was talking about this and you hate it and you think you will never use it, and maybe you don't want other people to use it either. If that's the case, then the draft can just go away, no hard feelings. And then the polar opposite of that is that you just love this idea and you actually have no reservations at all about requiring everyone to support some kind of change to the wire format of MLS. And if that's the case, if we actually have support for changing the wire format, we can, you know, go and update the draft to be more robust and maybe support more features if we can do wire format changes. But then kind of in the middle is maybe some people like this idea and want to use it. Maybe other people don't care enough to do it. And in that case, I'm pretty sure that I should be able to go back to the MLS working group and get it adopted in the MLS working group. And then it'll get polished up and published, and it will be available for people here to use if they want to or not. But yeah, so please let me know. You want to start, Raphael?
Yeah. Yeah, I think these are really interesting questions. I want to add a little more context to that. So, yeah, the whole discussion of that started in the MLS group, as you mentioned already, and we have 2 competing proposals there that are fundamentally very similar, and we don't have to litigate the differences between the 2 here. But what's maybe important to understand for Mimi is that the subgroup proposal you just presented, essentially, it does not require changes to the wire format, but it does require the DS, so in our case, the hub in Mimi, to have some additional features. So that would impact Mimi on that level. The other submission was called I think MLS Virtual Clients. And the difference there is that it is indeed a different wire format. So that would be a cost to bear, but there is no additional requirements for the delivery service. So yeah, in a way, like you win some, you lose some. It's not that important. Regarding using that in a system like Mimi, regardless of which draft we end up adopting or not, I think Britta pointed out some concerns that the privacy that we win here is at the expense of some security properties we no longer have, meaning essentially we don't know when individual clients emit updates any longer. Right now, since we have a complete view on every client of every user, we can get a sense for whether or not that client is actually active. That's the privacy problem, but it's on the security side. We could have a policy that, you know, mandates updates in a certain time frame, and if not, then that device gets evicted from the group. So we no longer can do that. And so it's really a trade-off between privacy and security, unfortunately. Just want to mention that for clarity here. Personally, I'd love to have one of these drafts, you know, being used in Mimi. I'm not sure that this is gonna sit well with all of the implementers, because having these subgroups for the virtual clients means that you do need a mechanism to essentially enroll new clients, probably using existing clients to do so. So, in order for things to be sort of secure. So I think that needs to be explored further if everybody is on board with that kind of requirement in Mimi.
Hey, Mustafa talking. So I first of all, I think we all agree in the name is wrong because we have in the main RFC subgroups, and that's not a subgroup. That's only like a delegation of the user clients kind of self group that's represented as like with a middle virtual client. That's the first part. The second part, I love the idea, but I would agree it would be better to have it in MLS working group because we can use it for different things. We can like I have some things that I'm working on, like chaining groups, etc. So that would be much helpful to use it like in the MLS itself. And again, about the identity problem, I agree with Ron because the identity problem, especially that we cannot access directly the identity and the client situation, what their state, what their updates. So that's another problem. The last problem that I see, still I don't get how we want to manage that subgroup and how. So I would say, since you are presenting it here in Mimi, you need the server to have some leverage, have access, like to manage that subgroup, to add or remove the clients. But what I'm thinking of is mostly having a dumb DS, like how described in the MLS. So in that case, it would be more difficult how we want to manage those clients inside of the subgroup, as you call it. Thank you.
Hi, Rowan May. Brendan, so first of all, I think this is cool. I like this, and I think that for clients, for managing your own clients, I think that that having the DS have to do a little work is worth it for the other clients not having to do work. So I think that is the right trade-off for for client to device hiding. There are, as Raphael mentioned, there are some cases where you're trading off the security for the privacy. I think that if we do this, we want to have some kind of an extension, an MLS extension or an MLS app component advertised that says, I'm doing this, or like a policy knob that says, for this particular room, we really don't want you to do this. And while it's not enforceable, it's kind of like self-deleting messages. The sort of social contract is clear, and if you get caught cheating, you get caught cheating. And yeah. So I had a question about functionality, which was a lot of servers don't keep messages around forever. So if let's say I've got a phone and a laptop and then a tablet, and my server only stores messages for a week or 2 weeks, and I go on vacation and my phone's sitting on my desk plugged in, but my tablet got turned off and it's just sitting in the desk drawer. So somebody sends a bunch of instant messages in a bunch of the groups I'm in. What happens to those messages for the device that talk about that scenario, please.
Yeah, so to go back to this picture, which was the network topology for supergroups, your specific case that you were talking about where you have one device and that device goes away, the way that you would think about that is that would just be one user in a group that maybe disappeared. So instead of applying the same sort of, so when you have an MLS group and you have one user in the group who has stopped updating, they've stopped receiving messages, they've just disappeared, you would have a policy that after a while you remove that person from the group. And then they don't have access to the messages anymore until they come back online and re-register or whatever. And if the server chooses to delete the messages for that specific device, so they're not in queue anymore, then those messages are gone.
Yeah,
And that same logic of like you evict inactive clients, you just apply that to the subgroup instead.
Yeah, I'm not sure I completely followed you there. So provider Y is sending provider X messages in the main group.
Mhm.
And there are at least a couple of, and the phone and the laptop are on, but the tablet or the watch is not. So does the laptop get removed from this Alice only group, or does it stay in the group and it just doesn't get messages? Like, I'm trying to get a grasp on what the user experience is there.
Yeah, so just ask yourself what would happen if you weren't using this draft. So if Alice's phone, laptop, and watch were all in the big group, the super group, individually, what would happen then? And the exact same logic applies. So if Alice's watch would be removed after a while of being inactive, then that's what would happen here too.
Brendan, thanks for writing this up. I'm not sure whether I prefer this or the alternate proposal that we were talking about, but I think this is something that MLS really should try to make clear how to do it. The leak of per device identifiers has always been a problem with MLS, so I appreciate the attempt to try to clarify it, and I think we should try to do this work. I don't know whether Mimi or MLS is the right place for it. I want to push back a little bit on this idea that there's a security versus privacy, or security versus, the Raphael's claim that there was this trade-off being made here. I'm not really convinced that's the case. You don't know. There's a number of different ways that these sorts of things could be handled in the background, and we really have no way of knowing what the other parties are doing, and that's by design. It's deliberately by design. So I appreciated Rohan's point of, I think it was Rohan who just said this, that this is similar to disappearing messages, but I don't think that the social contract is as clear here as the social contract for disappearing messages is. We all know, or we think we know, what disappearing messages means. You're going to throw this away after X amount of time. And it's pretty obvious what that means when someone breaks it. I don't think that the social contract is as clear here in terms of what security expectations are, and I don't think that this actually loses significant amounts of security compared to what we have today.
Yeah, TKG, I just wanted to reply briefly to that. I think the contract would be the minimum time or the maximum amount of time that key material can be lying around. So if the big group says, hey, I want to make sure that your keying material is updated at least every 30 days or at least every 90 days, that holds inside of all of the devices of Alice. And that could be different value for different rooms.
But
updated.
So I just want to warn folks against key fetishism, right? We don't care about the keys because we care about the keys. We care about the keys because we care about the messages. And updating a key, meaning making a new copy of the key, is not the same as destroying a key, destroying the old key. And I think the security gain only happens when you destroy a key, and we have no way of proving that a key has been destroyed. We simply have a way of knowing that someone has ratcheted a key forward. And if folks want to maintain, a device that does sit in a drawer for 2 weeks, even though the server has, mechanisms that purge after 1 week, those folks are going to propagate the messages to their wayward peer, whether they have the keys or not. And so because I want to be able to take my tablet out of the drawer and make that work, right? And so if we say that there's a key contract, users aren't thinking about keys. That's what I'm saying, that the social contract is not there around the keys. We as cryptographic engineers tend to fetishize the key, but the reason people rely on these messaging systems is to protect the content.
Yeah, and so to kind of draw that to a conclusion, the social contract that we were talking about, like the social contract for disappearing messages, is that you actually delete the message. The social contract here, I would say, is that whatever policy you have in the supergroup for evicting invalid or evicting inactive clients or deleting keys or deleting messages, you apply that same policy to the subgroup. So that's the social contract.
Yeah, so if I can just jump in here as well. I think there's a lot to unpack here, DKG, what you said. So it is not only about deleting keys, that is good for FS, but for PCS, we do need new keys. And this is mostly about PCS in that case. The point I wanted to get to actually is that we should not discuss this in the MIMI working group. This should really be in the MLS working group. The adoption of whichever draft should happen in the MLS working group, because as Mashaba said, this is bigger than just MIMI. What's important for this working group is to understand what consequences either of these drafts would have, aside from their little differences. And so I want to iterate again that right now intuitively there is only one way, if we were to use that in MIMI, to make this really safe, and that is to require device pairing as you enroll new devices, essentially. If we don't do that, then it's probably worse than what we have right now. And so I want to make sure that folks understand that. That being said, I'm a huge proponent of the whole idea. Our intuition is that this would dramatically increase efficiency, especially in the context of PQC, simply because MLS groups would be smaller. And on top of that, we would have fewer blanks because we get more updates per leaf in a given time frame. So we would actually repopulate the tree faster. So the combination of these two things would really make MLS groups a lot leaner and more efficient. So DKG, I invite you to, bring up all your concerns and talking points in the MLS working group, as it looks like we're gonna be discussing this again soon.
Okay, so speaking as a co-chair, I want to double down on what Raphael was just saying, in that the fact that the word adoption shows up a lot in this maybe causes one to become a little excited, but in fact, it seems like the action here, it seems like a consensus has emerged that MIMI is concerned about the problem that this addresses, and that this seems like, possibly a viable way to do it, though, as Raphael pointed out earlier, there's another proposal in MLS to do something about this. It sounds like the action here is for this draft to be discussed at MLS, and I would invite everybody who's at MIMI who thinks this is interesting and worth pursuing to pay attention to that discussion there. So Brendan, presumably you're going to go to MLS and talk about this. I would invite you to, let's say, cross-post whatever email thread you start to MIMI, just for everybody's attention. And then, of course, based on how this evolves, go ahead.
So I actually have already presented this to MLS in more detail. The action item from MLS was to take this to MIMI and get MIMI's verdict on this decision about what do we feel about wire format changes.
Okay, I see. Rowan, why don't you go ahead while I...
Yeah, sorry, I'm still fiddling around with the client, but personally, I do like the property of not requiring wire format changes for the clients. However, I think more important for the MLS chairs is that there is a lot of interest in us being able to solve this problem, and that when we solve it, we also are concerned about the PCS issue, and so Mimi may need to do some additional mechanism about policy or, expressing policy or what have you, but we need the sort of the primitives in MLS to go do that. So I think we're amenable, Mimi wants something to happen at MLS, and we kind of have, I think, eyes open about what the issues are for us and what kind of policy knobs we may or may not need to convey at the application layer.
Yeah, if I can just quickly answer that. Yeah, so Brendan, you're right. We did say that that we should get a feel for what Mimi thinks about that. So I think, of course, not having to change the wire format is a very desirable property. But I want to iterate once again that MLS subgroups would require changes in Mimi protocol for it to work.
I don't think that's true, though. Like, looking back at the network topology, like the hub server doesn't have to change any logic that it has. The hub server doesn't have to change anything at all. If there are any changes at all, it's to the local provider who already wanted to implement this draft.
But
So there's
that would
no
mean that
changes to
local
the hub if they
providers
don't want
would
to
have
implement
to
this.
track groups completely, which they don't have to do now. I mean, these days, like right now, a local provider can just relay stuff to the hub and does not need to track anything.
Well, yes, but the local provider wants to implement this draft.
Right, but it's an additional requirement for the local provider, nonetheless.
Sure, but it doesn't require participation from anyone else, and that's the point.
Right, but we need to understand the privacy, the potential privacy issues with that as well, because particularly in the context of metadata, minimal rooms, the local provider is not a party really, to that part of the protocol. So while we win some privacy now because of subgroups or virtual clients, then we would lose it at the local provider again.
Do people think it would be valuable to do a show of hands just to quickly get like a final answer?
I mean, the impression that I get is that there's a pretty clear consensus that Mimi wants to pursue this. What particular question would you want to do a show of hands for?
Should this be pursued in MLS with or without wire format changes? Right.
I mean, the wire format changes to MLS?
Yeah.
Like, I feel like that's a question for MLS.
Well, it's a question for Mimi because it depends on whether or not Mimi is comfortable mandating everybody to support this or not. Because if we do wire format changes and everybody doesn't support it, then you have downgrades for privacy, which is not good.
Jonathan, what benefits do you see from the wire format changes? I mean, I'm not in favor of them just because I like changing wire formats. So I want to know what the benefits are.
The benefit of a wire format change would be that you would be able to have more than 2 to the 32 clients in a single subgroup.
Yeah, and you don't have any additional requirements on any part of the server infrastructure, essentially. So the change is in the wire format, but the rest of the system or the architecture or whatever you want to call it remains completely intact. I think that's exactly the difference between the two proposals.
Is this something where we would expect that if we do it without wire format changes now and someday somebody in the future says, I've got this use case for, 10 billion devices, we could retrofit it? Or is it something we have to do now or never do?
I don't know. I feel like if Mimi is already deployed, it would be even harder to go back and say, well, now we need everybody to support this draft for it to work. So it's maybe the best point if you want to do wire format changes to require them.
So the thing I'm hung up on is that I'm honestly not sure whether like a decision made via show of hands in Mimi, gets to be binding on what MLS shall or shall not do. On top of that, it seems like there's so much overlap between the two working groups that if like, even if Mimi did have that authority as such, it seems like it'd be people in Mimi telling themselves to go do stuff at MLS.
Well, it's feedback to an adoption call for MLS, because if we put this up for adoption in MLS, the question is going to be, well, what do people think about wire format changes? And so we're not telling MLS to do anything. It's just feedback it's feedback to the first question they're going to have about this draft versus the other one.
Yes, sir.
Just one more addition. What we've also been discussing in MLS is two things. One is there's a draft for additional wire formats that I think was initiated by Google, which was specifically to target problems with implicit associated data. This could be extended to accommodate that. And 2 days ago, we also discussed how we could actually improve private messages after some research that was presented. So we have this problem of replay attacks in MLS essentially. So we might not have to introduce a new wire format just for that. We might combine, all these existing issues, and now we have 3 of them, into a new wire format that we might want to have anyway, and then Mimi could just use that. Sorry. Yeah, just for context.
All right. So we're at time for this session. And I have to admit, like, I'm not sure how to go forward. I think perhaps the move here would be to take this decision to the Mimi list so that you could get a consensus there, but you could then bring to MLS in support of an adoption call. But I wonder if that still ends up being like, take a poll in one place to then sort of feed into a poll at another place, whereas we could instead just ask Mimi participants to go respond to the relevant adoption call at MLS. Go ahead, Ori.
Hey, Ori Steele, I'm your area director. I think it's great to get a temperature check on the Mimi list, and I'll have a chat with the area directors. And I invite you also as chairs to chat with the MLS chairs on like how do we want to coordinate the information signaling we get here. I think get the information out and then let's have a chat to figure out what to do next. But I'm scratching my head too as to like what the right approach to go forward here is. So I think I'd rather have a chat with Paul and the MLS chairs also, just to sort of see what's going on, get some extra info. But thanks for the discussion today around this, and I'll be available after the fact and also after we get more information on the list. Thanks.
Okay.
I just have one more thing, which is that I don't think the Mimi working group has or should have an opinion about wire format or non-wire format. It's up to the MLS to say these would be the implications in your messaging system, and then we can make decisions based on that.
All right. So to wrap up, since we are a little bit past time, I think the action here is that like the chairs will take it upon ourselves to talk to Art AD, right, and then work with like the relevant chairs and AD on the second MLS side to figure out a path forward here. And Brendan, since this is your draft, we'll be sure to communicate to you what we think is the appropriate thing to do. Okay, sweet. Thanks, Brendan, for your time. All right, that's everything we have, and then some for today, and then some. Thanks everybody for your participation today, and we'll see you on the mailing list. Enjoy the rest of your IETF.